Hi, and welcome to the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. I'm your host, Tegan Thompson. I'm a book lover, a chocoholic, and an INTJ living in a world filled with extroverts. I made this podcast to share my experiences and struggles as an introverted perfectionist, and to bring the inner workings of an introvert's mind to introverts and extroverts alike. So grab a cup of tea and get comfortable. It's time to unmute. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. Happy Saturday. It's already, we're entering the last week of September, which is crazy. It's like the end of the year coming up, and it's officially fall, so yay, I love fall. Fall is like my favorite season. I love seeing the leaves change, and I love the cooler temperature, so I'm just really excited about this season. I hope, you've all been having a good week. This week, we'll be talking about high-functioning mental illness and how that can look and kind of the damage that it can have in society and kind of how mental illness is viewed. I want to start off by giving you guys a scenario. I'm sure that every one of you listening to this episode probably knows at least one person who goes to work or school every single day. Like, they don't miss a day. They're always there, always on time. Maybe they wake up early. They might be involved in like clubs or sports or hobbies, and they actively participate in these things and consistently participate in them. They might be goal-oriented and have a lot of accomplishments, and they may be cheerful and energetic and kind of just overall kind of appear really normal, but they're quietly suffering from a mental illness. And whether or not you know that, there are a lot of people that are suffering from a mental illness and not really showing visible symptoms of it. And this is a lot more common than most people believe. 1 in 4 adults in the US are expected to suffer from mental illness. And that's a lot of people if you think about it. Like, if you think about you and like 3 other people you know, more than likely at least one of you is suffering from a mental illness. Or if you're walking out in public and you like see a group of 10 people, there's probably about 2 to 3 people in that group suffering from mental illness. This is a lot more common than you think, even though there's some people who just don't really show that and they appear normal. And so like mental illness and mental health has a lot of different faces, if you will. It can present itself in many different ways, and because of this, mental illness should not be generalized, right? There should not be like a set specific thing or things or symptoms that you should look for in someone who is suffering from mental illness, because you cannot see mental illness. You can't look at someone and say, oh, they have depression, or oh, that person has bipolar disorder, or oh, that person has anxiety. Like, you can't look at someone and see mental illness. And that's because mental illness affects people of all different genders, ages, and personalities. And like, even people who have the same diagnosis, like maybe 2 people have been diagnosed with depression, they're still going to have drastically different experiences and different ways of presenting with that illness. So it's so important to recognize that you can't look at someone and say they have a mental illness, and you cannot say like, oh, well, these are the specific symptoms that someone will have in order to be diagnosed with a mental illness. Obviously, there are common things and a list of common things for all the different mental illnesses, But those are not the only things. And those are not the only things that define whether or not a person has a mental illness. So yeah. There's also some dangers that come with the existence of high functioning mental illnesses. And I'm going to talk about two of them. The first thing is that there's this misconception that these individuals who suffer from a high functioning mental illness don't need treatment because, oh, they seem fine, or they act normal, or they're still able to do their normal daily activities or whatever it is. But no matter whether they like go through their daily life normally or as you would expect normally to be, or if they lay in bed all day, like if you see someone who goes to work and then like hangs out with friends or spends time with their family or whatever and gets their work done and goes to bed at a decent time and wakes up early, versus a person who like can't get out of bed and doesn't have the energy to go shower and get dressed and leave their house and engage with people, that doesn't mean that that person suffering, both of them suffering from a mental illness, doesn't mean that the one who is still engaging in what appears to be normal daily activities doesn't need treatment. They still have and are suffering from a mental illness, and it's important that every person who is suffering from a mental illness acknowledge their mental illness, discuss their mental illness with friends, family, therapists, whoever, and that they get treatment for their mental illness, no matter what, no matter how you live your daily life, because your mental illness is still impacting you negatively in some way, even if it means that the public can't see how it's impacting you. So it's important that everyone still gets treatment for their mental illness, and that we don't like try to say you don't need treatment because like your symptoms are less severe, or you're still able to do the things that you want to do, whereas this person, they can't do that stuff and they have more severe symptoms, so they need treatment. No, everyone who is suffering from mental illness needs treatment. And you know, like, you wouldn't like tell someone who, like, I don't know, fractured their forearm that, oh, they don't need to treat their arm because, well, this person over here, they broke their forearm, so obviously they need treatment, but you're fine. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, everyone needs treatment no matter the severity of the mental illness. So that's really, really important to recognize. Also, with high functioning mental illness, the people around you often don't recognize that you're suffering from a mental illness. And when they find out that you are suffering from mental illness, they're like either shocked or they just like don't believe you. And for the person suffering from the mental illness, this is really hard and difficult to deal with because you're already suffering from the mental illness, and you may have been suffering silently and kind of internally for a long time, and you're finally verbalizing it, which can be scary. And now you're looking to receive support so that you can like get better and reach a more healthy mental health. But when the people around you get kind of like, they don't believe you or they're kind of shocked or whatever, it makes it really hard to build a support system. And when you don't have a support system, you feel alone and kind of isolated, and that makes it even more difficult to deal with and treat a mental illness. So Um, I think it's just really important to acknowledge that someone's not going to come up to you and be like, oh yeah, I'm suffering from depression, and be like lying to you about it, because I don't think people would want to pretend that they're suffering from a mental illness. And if they are lying to you, they haven't been diagnosed with it, and maybe they're doing it for attention, but either way, that person is still more than likely suffering from a mental illness that just has gone undiagnosed. So you should believe the person when they tell you, and you should be there to support them. If you need to ask questions or educate yourself on it, that's totally fine. I know personally, like, if someone were to ask me, like, what it was like to deal with a mental illness, I would be totally open to discussing with it, and I would actually probably be really excited to know that they're interested and supportive of me. So don't be afraid to ask questions. You might be scared, but they were scared telling you that they're going through this. So, it opens up vulnerability and will ultimately bring you guys closer, which is always a good thing. So, there's high functioning mental illness is kind of how I see it, at least, is like people living their life undetected of a mental illness. And they may be diagnosed or they may not be diagnosed, either one. But usually the people around them don't know that they're going through that. And whether it's you or someone else, or many people out there fighting in their own invisible battlefields every day that often get dismissed by others simply because these people appear normal. And I want you all to know that whether it's you or someone else you know, that person or your feelings, your pain, and your experiences, they're all real, they're all valid, they exist, they're not fake, you're not making them up. It is something that you are experiencing every day, and I know that there's probably a lot of people invalidating those feelings and those experiences that you're going through, and I want you to know they are real. I think when I kind of like talked to my sisters and my friends about what I was going through, and kind of them going, yeah, you're right. Like, yeah, that's rough. That's hard. I understand that. I think that was the first time that I was like, oh, wow. Like, what I'm going through is real. And, like, it's okay that I'm going through it. It's okay because a lot of people go through this stuff. And acknowledging it feels good, and having other people acknowledge it feels good. And kind of pushes you to want to receive the treatment that you need. So I'm acknowledging your emotions and your experiences and your pain, and hopefully you guys will acknowledge other people's feelings, pain, and experiences, and be there to support them. And I think the biggest thing when it comes to mental health in general is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And when I say that, I mean it's so important to have these conversations with other people about mental health, to talk about your experiences, so that you can receive support and kind of release that burden from your shoulders that you've been carrying for so long. And then also on the reverse side of it, hearing from other people who are going through these experiences, learning about it, and getting educated on mental health, and just kind of being an overall supporter for, mental health and those going through a mental illness. And I just think it's so important that nobody fights a mental illness on their own, and that's why having these conversations and building a support system is so important so that you aren't isolated and you always feel like you have someone to go to when, you know, you're maybe really struggling or you're having a bad day, because it's really easy to stay in those low points. You can get comfortable in those places, but we don't want to, because when you get comfortable there, you're going to stay there, and it's even harder to get out of it. So, you know, just be supportive and reach out to others. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode or if you learned anything new, please share it with a friend. And as always, have a good weekend. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next week on the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. Wow.